In this compilation, I bring you 3 videos of important or famous people, but it's something different. I tell you in the form of a riddle, and you can decide halfway through the case, or you can leave me here in the comments about which character I'm talking about. Welcome back to Revealed Portraits, this game where I'm going to test your knowledge about celebrities. I'm going to challenge you to guess who the mysterious person is behind the clues I'm going to give you. From movie stars to sports figures and music personalities, famous people. So get ready to test your education skills and cultural knowledge. Let's get started. At some point, this child's life would be marked from the start by the need to get more and more. He was born in New York on June 14, 1946. His father, whom we'll call by his first name Fred, was a successful man, dedicated to the real estate business, and our friend was born and raised in a neighborhood in the Queens district called Jamaica. He was the 4th of 5 siblings, and several of them had a distinguished career, but none reached the level of this young man. A boy who, it could be said, from the cradle understood that if he ever thought of dreaming big, he would need 2 things, money and power. His father was, of course, his role model. Since the 1920s, Fred, that was their father's name, had built a whole series of homes in the Queens and Brooklyn districts. And by 1940, he had not built hundreds but thousands of apartment buildings, especially in the Brooklyn area, taking advantage of a federal loan program. But not only in Brooklyn, he also expanded his company to Virginia and Pennsylvania, where he built more homes, but this time for naval personnel and shipyard workers. He attended the New York Military Academy, a private boarding school, also at Fordham University, and at the Wheaton School of Finance and Commerce at the University of Pennsylvania, therein. He earned a bachelor's in economics. He never served in the military because during the Vietnam War, he was diagnosed with bone spurs, a foot condition that exempted him from enlisting in the army. Thus, shortly after graduating, he started working full-time in his father's business as an administrator. By 1974, he was president of a conglomerate of corporations and associations owned by the family. What we said before, money and power. The family's developments in New York, Ohio, Virginia, Norfolk, and Cincinnati had received several complaints during the 1970s, all of them for racial discrimination, something that seemed to follow him to this day. In 1973, father and son were sued by the United States Department of Justice for violating the Fair Housing Act. A counterclaim for $100 million was filed, and everything was resolved 2 years later in a settlement that did not require the mega businessmen to admit their guilt. Thus, during the 80s, the business had expanded enormously, largely thanks to the business talent of our friend. He invested in casinos and hotels, even an air transport service and a tower that bears his own surname. Well, you should know that today his image is that of a hero for many and a villain for others. If there's one thing he's skilled at, it's getting people to talk about him. And perhaps he got to where he is today because there's no such thing as good or bad publicity, there's just publicity. During the 90s, with a severe recession hitting the United States hard, the empire he had built began to wobble. Despite the setback, his ambition persisted. He had a supreme plan and he would not hesitate to carry it out at all costs. But not everything that glitters evidently is gold. During the fierce American recession of the 90s, his company suffered the consequences of poor management and had to declare bankruptcy in 91. However, some time ago, in 77, he had married a Czech model named Ivana Selnikova, with whom he had 3 children. In 91, they divorced, and in 93, he married again, this time with Marla Maples. But bankruptcy at the level he was operating at obviously did not mean poverty. This man is a multimillionaire. From 1996 to 2015, he owned the Miss Universe pageants. He was also a recurring panelist on the conservative news show Fox Friends. Exposure and cameras seem to be his thing. He had his own television show where the prize was to be turned into a successful businessman. It was called, by the way, The Apprentice, and in 2004 it was a huge success on National Broadcasting Company with over 20 million viewers during the broadcast of the first season. However, our protagonist's businesses were at risk, and in 2004, his hotel and casino company Resorts filed for bankruptcy after several of his properties accumulated unimaginable debts. The same company, renamed as Entertainment Resort, went bankrupt once again in 2009. But what would eventually happen, his presidency in the United States of America, was in his plans long before. In fact, between the years 2000 and 2015, he had opened an exploratory committee to assess his presidential possibilities. But at first, the truth was harsh. He had no backing or an image capable of competing against George W. Bush or Barack Obama. And with what I just told you, it's almost certain that you have it, that you know who I'm talking about. If so, stop here and scroll down to the comments to tell me when you realized it. And it's that he's the man of the moment, perhaps one of the most controversial personalities of recent years. That's right, I'm talking about the tycoon Donald Trump, the former president who is currently trying to become president again. But we'll get to that in a moment. What cannot be disputed is that he was a famous figure. People knew who Donald Trump was thanks to television and his combative and straightforward personality. So little by little he began his political campaign. As the Democratic administration of Barack Obama gained media strength, Trump decided to make himself visible with an infallible weapon, criticism. As a guest on Fox News and through Twitter, he began to profile himself as a presidential candidate for the Republican Party. He made it official in 2015 with a press conference in the now famous Trump Tower, and he did it in his style with a first sentence that would go down in history.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. And they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some...
And so he proposed his project to build a wall between both countries, a wall that should supposedly be financed by Mexico, as it was the origin of the problem. The campaign was tumultuous, but it was gaining popularity and receiving support from conservative and right-wing groups, especially thanks to his anti-immigration policy, his racist policy. On the other hand, the Democratic Party faced Trump with an experienced Hillary Clinton, and both candidates measured up in 3 televised debates. Almost all polls had Donald Trump as the loser, but by a narrow margin that was not enough to reassure the Democratic ranks. By November 8th of the year 2016, the media businessman and star of Controversy achieved victory. He received 306 electoral votes against 232 for Hillary Clinton. He already had the highest power a person could aspire to. He had also lost and regained his fortune not once but several times. And he had also known how to read the discontent of the American population, who were looking for a strong and definitive word on hot topics. The question everyone was asking was, what's going to happen now? Well, on December 7th, Time magazine named Trump Person of the Year. On December 13th, he was named Person of the Year by Financial Times. And in December 2016, Forbes ranked Donald Trump as the second most powerful person in the world after Vladimir Putin. But his incendiary statements, which were celebrated by a sector of the population, generated strong rejection in another, and it didn't stop at rejection. Massive demonstrations and an escalation of violence in the streets were daily news. His link with the far right, his refusal to condemn organizations like the Ku Klux Klan and others, made him one of the most eccentric leaders in the country's history. And the end of his term was also surrounded by scandals and conspiracy theories that everyone takes for granted, although the truth is that not everyone is sure of the official version. He refused to acknowledge Joe Biden's victory and was accused of manipulating the electoral authorities. He was impeached twice, something unprecedented in the political history of the United States, which has never been far, indeed, from scandals. All signs point to Trump having disbursed a large sum, $130,000, to Michael Cohen, a lawyer and man of his complete trust, during his stay at the White House. But perhaps you're wondering why this was a problem. Well, because he is accused of having authorized his company to falsify the records of that transaction. But anyway, the important question is why this? Well, because that money was intended to hide the fact that he would have paid an actress not for her services, professional services. And so Donald Trump faces the possibility of being sentenced to 4 years in prison and seeing his political career complicated. Although look at this strange panorama, and I tell you this because if he still won the election in November, he could still govern from jail. Look closely at this face and notice the quality of the photograph. You realize it's old, right? I don't know how old you are who are listening to me, but surely you have old photos. Even in digital images, you can tell they are a few years old. Surely those photographs give you memories, complete stories from a certain time. Now, let me ask you something. Can a century have a face? The 20th century, for example, many would put the face of Einstein or Hitler or Elvis, and they would all be right, but you don't have to be so extreme. Even decades can have a face, and this face you're seeing could easily be the face of the 90s and the 2000s. Do you recognize it? Well, look, let's play a game. Just let me tell you the rules and we'll start. I'm going to tell you the story of the person in this photograph. It will be full of clues, and you might guess who it is before I tell you. If you do, leave it in the comments at what minute of the video you figured it out and what clue gave you the answer. Now let's get started. Even though he succeeded in and from the United States, he was not born in this country.
Many don't even realize it, and let's agree, nobody
Cares too much about this either. We all know him though. So be sure we're talking about someone who won't let you down. Our hero was born on January 17th, 1962 in the city of Newmarket in Ontario, Canada. This cheerful young man we see was the youngest of 4 siblings. His mother, named Kayleen, was a homemaker. His father, named Percy, was an accountant, but what he liked most was playing the saxophone. This young man's mother suffered from chronic health problems, meaning there was no cure. The family had to live with that. In the best way possible, a struggle that fell mostly on Percy's shoulders. Thus, in the midst of that tense atmosphere, the boy spent a lot of time locked in his room. He was very small, around 7 or 8 years old. He had no one to play with, and his parents, as I told you, had their own problems. As this was strange, he had no friends and made up 2. The television, which took him out of reality and showed him worlds and characters that seemed infinite. And of course, the mirror. In it, he could see himself, characterizing the characters that impacted him. A phone that for another would be something that would keep him entertained for a few minutes, but for him it became a thrilling game. He believed he had talent, and when he was just 10 years old, he sent his resume to the producers of The Carol Burnett Show, an American sketch comedy that aired on Columbia Broadcasting System and had 279 episodes, but he was not lucky. At that time, he thought his life was quite sad, without possibilities to offer a path to know the world and find his place as an artist. What he didn't know in those early years was that things were going to get worse very soon. This future star reached adolescence, and the situation that was, we could say, quite gray became even blacker, darker. His father lost his job and the family was forced to move from Newmarket to a suburban neighborhood in Toronto, but it wasn't the first move and it wasn't even to a house. They didn't have the means to rent one. They lived in a car, camping in a camping tent. They were truly homeless. That situation forced him to leave school at 15 and get a job as a janitor. What he was paid was barely decent, just enough to help the family get by. And we all know what adolescence is like, and the situation would have angered anyone. But our friend was furious, but not against his father, society, or his mother's illness. He really didn't know who his frustration and anger was directed at. He had to vent in some way. It could be through violence or a bad attitude, but his choice was very different. He got his first big break in comedy shortly after his family became homeless. He got a stand-up gig at Juck Juck's Comedy Club in Toronto. But what few people know is that in that first performance, the audience booed him so much that he had to leave the stage. Of course, he didn't give up, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about him today, obviously. He got a second chance and presented a number more in line with the public's taste. That being said, he interspersed his unique personality until, little by little, the public grew fond of him. He was 16 years old, but his charisma did not go unnoticed. What started as an outlet for frustration allowed him in the year of 1979 to quit his job as a janitor. He began to make a living as an opening act for established comedians like Rodney Dangerfield and Buddy Hackett. He was getting really good, but he had to take the next step, something that couldn't happen in his native Canada. Let me tell you that at just 19 years old, he moved from Canada to Hollywood. He had already had an intense experience on stage performing live, but he wanted something more. He wanted to touch that world that had kept him safe during his childhood. He wanted cinema, he wanted television. At the beginning of the 80s, he got small roles in comedies like Finder Keepers and Once Beaten. It was a tough road. He had to start from the bottom, show his talent, make contacts. At 19 years old, we are all full of energy. Although not many of us have that manic energy that characterized this character. So it was in the early 90s when he began to make more or less regular appearances on a popular comedy show called In Living Color. This show was a springboard for many iconic names of the last decades like Jamie Foxx or Jennifer Lopez, to give you more or less an idea. But the name that interests us is another, the young Canadian who had a style as intense as it was unique and who would be one of the best comedy stars of the 90s and 2000s, none other than the Jim Carrey. Now yes, everything I've been telling you before this makes sense. And this is the moment when you can pause the video and run to the comments and let me know at what minute you realized who I was talking about. Ready? Well then, let's proceed with the topic. His success on television encouraged him to do more. He was already well known in every American household. The next step, the definitive one, was cinema. And his first opportunity would come from a project as outlandish as he was. A delirious adventure movie where he would play a pet private investigator, Ace Ventura, pet detective. If you're my age, you probably grew up with this movie. In this and also in the next one, Dumb and Dumber, which in many places was known as Fool and Fooler, Carrey displays a range of facial expressions, strange acrobatics, and a completely exaggerated mime work, something that had never been seen on screen to that extent. In Dumb and Dumber, the constant tribute to another historic comedian, the great Jerry Lewis, is evident, something that made his work connect not only with new generations, but also with old-school viewers, those who fondly remembered shows like The Three Stooges or Charlie Chaplin himself. His next starring role was a revolutionary film in its time. Also, if you're my age, you surely grew up with this. You know which one I'm referring to, The Mask. Combined with his physical skills for the absurd and the almost perfect integration between computer-generated imagery and real image. With a very young Cameron Diaz, and with a plot adapted to a bloody comic from which all explicit violence was removed. The Mask was an immediate success, a resounding success. For his performance in that film, he received the first of several Golden Globe nominations. Well, Jim has won 2 Golden Globes, but none of them as a comedian, but for his dramatic roles in The Truman Show and Man on the Moon. In the latter, a biographical film from '99, Jim plays Andy Kaufman, a comedian who performed acts so far removed from what is considered comedy that he suffered the rejection and harassment of the press and the public. Perhaps recalling his first performance where he was booed until he was forced to flee, Carrey immersed himself in the character with the same method as the great character actors, living in the skin of his character even when he was not in front of the cameras. He demanded to be called Andy on the set and did not take off his character's clothes. On the other hand, 3 years earlier, in '96, Carrey earned $20 million for his role in The Cable Guy. Reportedly, that was the largest initial amount earned by a comedy actor at that time, of course. Undoubtedly, he had come a long way from the struggles of his childhood. His unique style as a comedian is exaggerated and flamboyant. It must be said it hasn't been liked by everyone, and he has received harsh criticism throughout his career. He doesn't shy away from scatological and even crude humor, but his dramatic roles are on par with a true character actor. Jim Carrey's career has already passed its peak, that's for sure. We must accept that in 2015, he experienced a personal setback that harmed his career. It was when Katrina White, who was his girlfriend at the time, took her own life by overdosing on drugs. Katrina's family filed a lawsuit against him, accusing him of providing her with the drugs and creating an atmosphere of oppression and psychological violence within the relationship that allegedly triggered his girlfriend's tragic decision. Carrey, on the other hand, filed a counterclaim stating that it was all a ploy by the family to get money at his expense. Finally, a judge ruled in his favor and everything returned to normal, or almost normal. And I tell you this because if movie stars manage to escape scandal, conspiracies will always be lurking. Because it all started in the year 2014 when Jim was giving an interview on Jimmy Kimmel's show. As soon as he sits down, Carrey places his hands in the shape of a triangle and accuses the host of being part of the Illuminati sect, challenging him to say he doesn't know what he's talking about. There are those who claim that after that open challenge thrown by Jim, his career plummeted, and that the death of his girlfriend was part of the warning
that he received
from the elite. Right now, you can find many pages that claim that awkward moment between Jim Carrey and the host was just a joke to promote his next movie, the sequel to Dumb and Dumber. Although none explained what that gesture and the allusion to the Illuminati have to do with the plot, but nevertheless more rested and measured, a little more spiritual, Jim managed to revive his career. Similarly, the Canadian boy who lived in a tent and had to leave school has learned a lot along the way. The years when money, or rather the lack of it, was his biggest problem are far behind. And speaking of this, he recently said the following: "I wish all those people who think they're unhappy because they don't have money had many millions. Then they would understand that happiness and money have nothing to do with each other." Before we start, I want to give you a small warning, or let's say clarification. This is going to be very easy for some of you, this revelation, and very difficult for others. We're going to talk about one of the faces that has caused the most instant crushes, but with a little trick, because it's not any of the names that will come to mind if you think about the last few years. And this makes this game quite interesting. So if you can Find out who I'm talking about and remember to leave me the times you guessed in the comments, and also tell me what you think of this new type of video that I think no one else is doing. Our mystery today was born on November 19th of the year 61 in Fairfield, Connecticut. His mother, Susan Jordan, had been an actress in her youth, but she was dedicated to teaching English. Harry's father was also a mathematics teacher. Fairfield is a quiet place, so his adolescence was quite typical, especially in those years. There were 4 siblings at home, a Catholic family, everything quite normal, very American. However, his parents divorced in 76 and he graduated from high school in 79. Susan left and Harry had to take care of the 4 children, a task he fulfilled but did not hide the stress that all this work caused him. He studied journalism at the University of Connecticut and continued his studies at New York University. The studies were going well, but he was far from home, had needs, and to get some extra money, he started to appear in castings for television commercials. He managed to star in some more for important firms, such as, for example, Burger King. The fact is that he still managed to get a few and didn't stop there. He got a role in the soap opera At the World Turns. In Spanish, it would be While the World Turns. He then had only 6 months left to graduate when he decided that he didn't want to be a journalist. The future was in acting. So he dropped out of college after making his film debut, under the direction of George Cukor in 81. The director, by then already a veteran, had filmed classics like My Fair Lady with Andrew Hepburn, and that movie Rich and Famous would be his last film. But the director's instruction would be, don't act less, even less. In fact, do nothing. Something that could obviously be offensive to any actor, but she didn't take it badly. In fact, she adopted it as one of her personal trademarks. And it's not that she made a style out of being expressionless, not at all.
Further away
from reality. She simply decided not to act in front of the cameras, but to be as natural as possible. After that first experience, her career would take off. It was George Cukor's farewell, a movie star, and the birth of another. The 80s were then the boom of romantic comedies. Actresses like Goldie Hawn and actors like Chevy Chase were making millions, and the audience was eager to do something that only now has a name, the famous shipping or shipeo. Which actor would make a better couple with which actress? The industry paid close attention to those details. Couples with chemistry were a goldmine, and even gossip magazines launched surveys to probe the preferences of the potential audience. But our character had an uncommon honor, an honor that was reflected in the nickname the media gave her, America's Sweetheart. Because the fact is that with the nickname, she became one of the most feared by an actor or actress typecasting. She caught attention immediately. She was a classic beauty, but with a charisma very unusual for the time. She had a small role in the iconic Top Gun, but it would be another role that strongly marked not her professional life, but personal. It was during the filming of Inner Space in 1987, a science fiction comedy in which a group of people are reduced in size in a capsule to be injected into a rabbit. There she would meet who would be the perfect match, actor Dennis Quaid. The courtship occurred at the same time with her consecration in the movie, which she starred alongside Billy Crystal. In fact, there's a scene from that movie that is still used today as a kind of meme or a WhatsApp sticker. In it, we see her act out a very, very strong context scene at the table of a cafeteria, pretending a joy, we could say. The movies kept coming one after another, and her life seemed even more ideal than her roles. She and Dennis seemed designed to look good together, one of the most beloved couples of the scene back in the 90s. They got married in 91, and their son Jack was born in April of 92, but all that perfection fell like a house of cards. A third party had appeared and swept away everything that was believed and expected from someone who seemed as perfect on the outside as on the inside. And it happened at the same time that she had decided to take a turn in her career and set aside, at least for a while, romantic comedies. And it was during the filming of a drama called Proof of Life that she had, they say, a crush that broke her marriage. It was a very hard blow for our protagonist, and as if this were not enough, she carried all the blame and all the adjectives. None of them very nice, it must be said. But they had to pass for her side of the story to be known, because at that time, Dennis's career was fading, and his problems with illegal substances had started much earlier. It would later be known that Dennis, in addition to his problem with addictive substances, was a chronic cheater. The perfect couple between the charismatic heartthrob and America's sweetheart was anything but perfect. And that was the beginning of the fall of, now yes, you know who I'm talking about, yes, Meg Ryan. Thus, the scandal of her affair with Russo was such that it disproved the saying that there's no such thing as good or bad publicity, only publicity. The movie was a failure. The audience didn't forgive her for breaking the illusion of the perfect couple. The media showed no mercy on her, and even though she made her relationship with her ex public in 2001, it was already too late. Hollywood had turned its back on her. To give you an idea, during the 90s, Meg Ryan had filmed 18 movies. In the 2000s, her number had dropped by half, and of course, the publicity and diffusion had been far below her peak. Though strange, it's not unusual in such cases. Many had already forgotten her clandestine romance, but the industry has a memory that is proof of everything, even evidence. Several of her later films didn't even get distributed or shown in the United States. As we see, the queen of romantic comedy did not find in her personal life what she reflected so well in her movies. Films like You've Got Mail or City of Angels are, and have been, within the genre of course, unsurpassed. But what was left for someone who had been considered synonymous with idealized romanticism after her career and personal life took not only a different but opposite direction? Well, her disappearance from show business was regrettable for many, but she did not stay out of the comments, unfortunately, always in a very unkind way. And the next time we heard from her was due to a series of notes and social media posts criticizing her appearance. A series of surgical interventions that had not gone entirely well, or so it was said. Since she turned 40, she was systematically harassed by the press, accusing her of not being able to face the consequences of age. Plastic surgeons were even interviewed to give their opinions based on photographs about the procedures the actress might have undergone. A more than regrettable spectacle, needless to say, because why should people care what someone else does with their face or body? That's not a decision of other people, nor should they have an opinion. But well, in recent years, Meg has given some interviews making the obvious clear. It has been a heavy burden having to respond to totally unrealistic expectations. He was obviously referring to an audience that demanded him to be like the characters in his movies, but it seems to be something that currently does not concern him. He emphasizes that he became an actor by chance. It was something that started to work and led her to have an exposure and a standard of living that was not her priority or her goal. Similarly, she has returned to acting in small roles and participations in which she has regained the pleasure of acting, as she understands it, being natural and having fun in the process. She also appears at events supporting her friends in the industry, actors of her generation who have suffered setbacks, as is the case with Michael J. Fox, and at her then 62 years old, America's sweetheart seems to have found love in a solitude full of friends and a healthy relationship with her own past. And before we go, I ask you, did you know Meg Ryan or any of her movies? Maybe by name no, but seeing her, I'm sure it rings a bell or it seems somewhat familiar to you. Romantic comedies may not be at their best today, and I don't even like them. But in the 80s and 90s, they had a great deal of naivety that is not in fashion today, I repeat, but also of cruelty and lack of limits in many aspects. It's true that things have changed, that's definite. What could bury an artist's career yesterday, today can mean a gigantic leap towards fame. I'm sure that if this had happened to this woman, this actress, in these times, things would have been very different. However, even though all these things change place from time to time, what we are sure of is that no one can say no to a girl who can make us fall in love with lifelong romance. If you like this type of videos, you can find them on a channel called the Pepe Misterio. That's how you find it on YouTube. They are videos, as you noticed, of pure riddles. Thank you.